My husband made me eat on the floor. His family made sure he ate alone for good. The first time Kellen told me to eat on the floor, I thought he was joking. We had been married for about 5 months and we were having dinner at his apartment, which is where we lived after the wedding. He made spaghetti and I sat down at the table and started eating. He looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Eating." He said, "Not there." I asked what he meant. He said the table was for him and that I could eat on the floor or at the counter. I laughed because I genuinely thought it was a bad joke. He didn't laugh. He said in his house the man eats at the table and the woman eats where there's space. I told him that was insane. He told me that's how his grandfather did it and that's how he was going to do it. I told him I wasn't going to eat on the floor. He took my plate off the table and set it on the kitchen counter and said, "Fine, eat here then." I was so shocked I just stood there and ate at the counter because I didn't know what else to do. That was the first time. It wasn't the last. Over the next few weeks, Kellen enforced this rule like it was law. If I sat at the table, he would move my plate. If I pushed back, he would stop talking to me for the rest of the night. Not yelling, not hitting, just cold, total silence like I didn't exist. He trained me to choose the counter over the fight. Then one night, he moved the only chair from the counter area and told me the counter was getting too cluttered and that I should eat in the living room. The living room had a couch, but he said food wasn't allowed on the couch. The only place left was the floor. I sat on the floor with a plate on my lap and ate dinner while my husband sat at a table 6 feet away from me eating the same meal I cooked. I cooked every single meal in that house. He didn't know how to boil water properly. I cooked and he ate at the table and I ate on the floor. I ate on the floor. The tile was cold. Even in summer, that kitchen floor never warmed up. I started putting a dish towel down to sit on because my legs went numb after 20 minutes on bare tile. Some nights I ate faster than I normally would just to get off the floor. Some nights I didn't eat at all because sitting on the floor felt worse than being hungry. Kellen noticed when I skipped meals. He said I was being passive-aggressive. He said if I didn't want to eat, that was my choice, but I shouldn't make it into a statement. Everything I did was either obedience or rebellion to him. There was nothing in between. On the nights I did eat on the floor, I stared at the wall or I looked at my phone. I couldn't look at him sitting at the table because every time I did, I felt something shrink inside me. Something that used to be anger was slowly becoming acceptance, and I could feel it happening in real time, and I hated myself for letting it. The worst night was a Thursday. I had made chicken parmesan from scratch, his favorite. I even made garlic bread from a recipe my mother gave me. I plated everything and brought his to the table and brought mine to the floor and sat down, and the plate was too hot on my lap, and I shifted, and the chicken slid off and landed on the tile. He looked over at me and said, "See, that's why you should use the floor plate." The floor plate. He had given the plate I ate from a name, like I was a pet with a designated bowl. I cleaned up the chicken and ate the garlic bread on the floor, and I didn't say a word. This went on for 3 months. I didn't tell anyone because I was embarrassed. What kind of person admits that their husband makes them eat on the floor? I kept it to myself until Kellen's sister Margot came over for dinner one Sunday. I made a roast. I set the table for 2 because that's what I always did. Kellen sat down. Margot sat down. I grabbed my plate and walked toward the living room. Margot looked at me and said, "Where are you going?" I said I was going to eat in the other room. She asked why. Before I could answer, Kellen said she likes eating in there and that she was more comfortable on her own. Margot looked at me. I didn't say anything. She looked at Kellen and said, "That's weird. Why wouldn't your wife eat with us?" Kellen said, "Drop it." Margot didn't drop it. She asked me directly. She said, "Are you choosing to eat in the other room, or is he telling you to?" I stood there holding my plate, and I could feel Kellen staring at me. I told the truth. I said he doesn't let me eat at the table. Margot put her fork down. She asked Kellen what I was talking about. He said it was a personal arrangement between husband and wife, and that it wasn't her business. Margot said making your wife eat off the table is absolutely my business. Kellen told her this was his home and his rules. Margot said this is your wife, not your pet. She stood up and pulled out the chair next to her and told me to sit. I sat down. Kellen looked at both of us and said nothing. We ate in silence. After dinner, Margot stayed while Kellen went to the bedroom. She asked how long this had been going on. I told her since month 5. She asked how long this had been going on. I told her since month 5. She asked if he ever hurt me physically. I said no. She said this is hurting you, and I nodded. Margot left that night and I thought it would blow over. It didn't. 3 days later, Kellen's parents showed up unannounced. His dad Howie walked in first, and his mom Deb was right behind him. Kellen came out of the bedroom and asked what was going on. Howie said Margot told them everything. Kellen said Margot was exaggerating and that it was just how we ate. Howie asked me to tell him exactly what was happening. I told him. I told him about the plate being moved off the table. I told him about the counter and then the chair being taken away. I told him about the floor. Howie turned to Kellen and said, "Where did you learn this?" Kellen said his grandfather did it that way. Howie went quiet and then said, "My father did a lot of things wrong and I spent my life making sure I didn't repeat them." He said, "I sat your mother at the head of every table we owned and you were there for every one of those meals." He said, "You didn't learn this from me and you didn't learn it from this family." Deb hadn't spoken until then. She walked into the kitchen and grabbed a plate from the cabinet and set it on the floor in front of Kellen. She said, "If the floor is good enough for your wife, then eat." Kellen didn't move. Deb said, "Go ahead. Sit down and eat off the floor since you think that's how a meal works." Kellen told his mother she was being dramatic. Howie stepped forward and said, "No, she's being exactly right." He said, "Your mother cooked for this family every night for 30 years, and she sat at the table every single time and nobody ever once suggested she shouldn't." The room was quiet for a long time. Howie raised his head and looked at me. He said, "How long have you been eating on the floor?" I told him 3 months. He closed his eyes. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "Pack a bag. You're coming to our house." He wasn't talking to Kellen. He was talking to me. Kellen stood up. "You can't take my wife out of my house." Howie said, "I'm not taking her anywhere. I'm offering her a table to eat at since you won't." He looked at me. "You're welcome to stay with us as long as you need." I looked at Kellen. He looked like a man whose walls were closing in from every direction. His mother, mother, his father, his sister, all of them standing on the same side and none of them standing on his. I went to the bedroom and packed a bag. It took me 12 minutes. I didn't own much at that apartment because Kellen had opinions about what I brought into his space the same way he had opinions about where I ate. When I came out with the bag, Kellen was sitting at the table alone. His mother's plate was still on the floor in front of the chair where she had set it. He hadn't picked it up.